Good afternoon, dear reader. Tonight, we bring you a reading of Stephen King's 1968 short story, Strawberry Spring, a Springheel Jack. I saw those words in the newspaper this morning, and oh how they transported me back in time. That was 8 years ago, almost to the day. I remember catching a glimpse of myself on national TV during that time, a fleeting moment on the Walter Cronkite report. Just a face in the background, rushing past behind the reporter. But my parents recognized me instantly. They called me long distance, my father full of hearty bluster, wanting my take on the situation. My mother simply begged me to come home. But I didn't want to. I was captivated, utterly entranced by that dark, mist-shrouded strawberry spring and the shadow of violent death that stalked through those nights 8 years ago. The shadow of Springheel Jack. In New England, they call it a strawberry spring. No one knows why. It's just a phrase passed down by the old-timers. They say it comes around every 8 to 10 years. What happened during that strawberry spring at New Sharon's Teachers College might also follow some kind of cycle. But if anyone's figured it out, they've kept it to themselves. At New Sharon, that particular strawberry spring began on March 16, 1968. That day, the coldest winter in 2 decades finally broke. Rain fell, carrying the faint scent of the sea even though we were 20 miles inland. Snow piled as high as 35 inches in some spots began to melt, leaving the campus paths slick with slush. The winter carnival snow sculptures, which had stood pristine for 2 months thanks to sub-zero temperatures, started to droop and lose their sharp edges. A caricature of Lyndon Johnson in front of the Tea Fraternity House shed melting tears, while the dove sculpture in front of Prasher Hall lost its icy feathers, exposing its plywood frame beneath. When night arrived, so did the fog, thick white and silent. It crept through the narrow college streets and over the pathways, lingering like smoke beneath the little bridge near the Civil War cannons. The pine trees on the mall pierced through the haze like skeletal fingers. Everything seemed strange, disjointed, as if the fog had bent reality itself. The night felt strange and magical. An unsuspecting traveler stepping out of the brightly lit cows of the grinder, its jukebox thumping away, might expect the biting clarity of a starry winter night to greet them. Instead, they would find themselves enveloped in a silent, muffled world of drifting white fog. The only sounds were their own footsteps and the gentle dripping of water from old gutters. It was a scene so surreal that you half expected to see Gollum or Frodo and Sam hurrying by, or perhaps to turn around and find the grinder gone, replaced by a misty expanse of moors, ancient yew trees, and maybe even a druid circle or a shimmering fairy ring. That year, the jukebox endlessly played Love is Blue, Hey Jude, and Scarborough Fair. It was at 10:10 p.m. on one of those foggy nights when John Dancy, a junior, stumbled upon her. On his way back to his dormitory, he began screaming into the fog, dropping his books as he stumbled onto the sprawled legs of the dead girl lying in the shadows of the Animal Sciences parking lot. Her throat had been slashed ear to ear, yet her eyes were wide open, sparkling as if she'd just played the greatest prank of her young life. Dancy, an education major with a speech minor, screamed and screamed and screamed. The next day was grey and somber, the air heavy with questions as we attended our classes. Everyone speculated who did it, why, when will they catch him? And the final, most whispered question, did you know her? The answers were eerily similar. Yes, I had an art class with her. Yes, one of my roommate's friends dated her. Yes, she borrowed a light from me once in the grinder. She sat at the table next to mine. Everyone seemed to have known her. Her name was Gail Kerman. She was an art major with a good figure and a pair of granny glasses. She was well liked, though her roommates had despised her. Despite rarely going out, she had a reputation as one of the most promiscuous girls on campus. She was described as ugly but somehow cute. A vivacious yet reserved, she seldom smiled and rarely talked. Rumors swirled. She had been pregnant, she had leukemia, she was a lesbian, and she had been killed by her boyfriend. None of it mattered now. What mattered was that she was dead, It was Strawberry Spring, and by the morning of March 17th, the entire campus knew her name, Gail Kerman. That day, half a dozen state police cars arrived on campus, parking in front of Judith Franklin Hall, where she had lived. On my way to my 10 a.m. class, I was stopped and asked to show my student ID. I played it smart and handed him the ID without the fangs. "Do you carry a knife?" the policeman asked, trying to sound casual but clearly fishing for something. "Is this about Gail Kerman?" I replied, after assuring him that the most dangerous thing I had on me was a rabbit's foot keychain. "What makes you ask?" He countered, quick to seize on my words. I ended up 5 minutes late to class that day. It was Strawberry Spring, and that night, no one dared to walk alone through the campus, caught somewhere between its academic charm and eerie, dreamlike quality. The fog had returned, thick and salty with the scent of the sea, wrapping everything in a quiet, otherworldly stillness. Around 9 p.m. my roommate burst into our room, where I had been agonizing over a Milton essay for hours. "Thee caught him?" he exclaimed. "Who?" I asked. "I heard it over at the Grinder. Her boyfriend did it. His name's Carl Amala." Relief and disappointment washed over me in equal measure. With a name like that, it had to be true, a sordid little crime of passion, plain and simple. "Okay," I said. "That's good." He left to spread the news down the hall. I turned back to my essay, reread it, and realized I had no idea what I'd been trying to say. Frustrated, I tore it up and started over. The next morning, the paper confirmed the rumor. There was an oddly tidy photo of Amala, likely from his high school graduation. It showed a sad-looking boy with an olive complexion, dark eyes and pockmarked skin. He hadn't confessed yet, but the evidence against him seemed damning. He and Gail had been arguing a lot in the past month, breaking up just a week before her death. According to his roommate, Amala had been despondent. Police found a 7-inch hunting knife from LL Bean in a footlocker under his bed, along with a picture of Gail that had been shredded with scissors. The article also included a blurry photo of Gail. In it, she stood beside a dog, a peeling lawn flamingo in the background. She was a mousy blonde with glasses, her lips curled into an awkward smile that didn't quite reach her squinting eyes. One hand rested on the dog's head. Seeing the photo made it feel real. It had to be true. That night, the fog returned, not creeping in softly like a cat, but sprawling over the campus in a heavy, silent wave. I walked through it, trying to clear a headache, inhaling the damp, misty air of the Strawberry Spring. The last patches of reluctant snow melted away, revealing lifeless, yellowed grass underneath, like the scalp of an old, sighing grandmother. For me, that night was strangely beautiful. I can still recall the people I passed under the glowing halos of the streetlights. They appeared as murmuring shadows, most of them couples, hands and eyes intertwined as they walked. The melting snow dripped and trickled down in endless rivulets, and from every dark storm drain, the sound of the sea seemed to rise, a dark, winter sea, ebbing and pulling away. I walked until nearly midnight, soaked through with dampness, and past countless shadows along the foggy paths. Footsteps echoed dreamily, fading into the winding darkness. Who's to say that one of those shadows wasn't the man, or the thing, that would come to be known as Springheel Jack? Not me. I saw no faces in the fog, only shadows. The next morning, the commotion in the hall woke me. I stumbled out, half awake, running my hands through my hair and trying to scrape the dryness from the roof of my mouth with my tongue. "He got another one," someone said, his face pale with a mix of excitement and fear. "Thee had to let Amala go," another voice chimed in, almost gleeful. "Why?" I asked, still groggy. "He was in jail when it happened," someone explained. "When what happened?" I pressed, sure that I'd figure it out sooner or later. "The guy killed someone else last night, and now they're hunting him." "Hunting who?" "The girl," the voice whispered with a shiver. "Whoever killed her took her head with him." New Sharon wasn't a large school back then, even smaller than it is now, a tight-knit institution that the public relations folks like to call a community college. And, for better or worse, it was exactly that. Everyone knew everyone, even if it was just a passing nod in the halls. Gail Kerman had been the kind of person you nodded to, vaguely recognizing her, but never really knowing her. Anne Bray, on the other hand, was different. Everyone knew Anne Bray. She'd been first runner-up in the Miss New England pageant the year before, performing a bait and twirling routine to Hey Look Me Over. But she wasn't just talented, she was brilliant. She was the editor of the school newspaper, a once-weekly publication filled with political cartoons and fiery letters to the editor. She was a member of the Student Dramatic Society and president of the campus branch of the National Service Sorority. In my eager, wide-eyed freshman days, I had submitted a column idea to the paper and even worked up the courage to ask her on a date. She turned me down on both counts. And now she was gone, worse than gone. I walked to my afternoon classes like everyone else, nodding at familiar faces and offering slightly more enthusiastic greetings than usual, as if overcompensating for the way I was scrutinizing each person's expression, just as they were scrutinizing mine. Something dark lingered among us, as sinister and unknowable as the shadowy path wending across the mall or twisting through the century-old oaks on the quad behind the gym. It was as ominous as the hulking Civil War cannons, their forms blurred by the drifting fog. We searched each other's faces, silently trying to detect the darkness that might be hiding behind one of them. This time, the police made no arrests. Their blue patrol cars circled the campus relentlessly during the foggy nights of the 18th, 19th, and 20th. Spotlights probed every shadowy corner and hidden nook with frantic urgency. The administration responded with a strict 9:00 p.m. curfew. When a daring couple was caught necking in the bushes near the Tate Alumni building, they were dragged to the New Sharon police station and interrogated for 3 grueling hours. On the 20th, a false alarm sent the campus into a frenzy. A boy was found unconscious in the same parking lot where Gail Kerman's body had been discovered. A panicked campus cop loaded him into the back of his cruiser without checking for a pulse, throwing a county map over the boy's face before speeding toward the hospital, sirens screaming across the deserted campus like a chorus of banshees. Midway to his destination, the corpse, in the back seat, sat up and groggily asked, "Where the hell am I?" Startled, the officer screamed and swerved off the road. The supposed corpse turned out to be Donald Morris, an undergraduate who had been bedridden for 2 days with a nasty case of the flu. Whether it was the Asian flu or another strain, I can't remember, but the poor guy had fainted in the parking lot while on his way to the grinder for soup and toast. The days remained warm and overcast, and the campus atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Students huddled in small groups, but these gatherings dissolved and reformed with startling speed. Staring at the same set of faces for too long made you start to suspect things about them. Things you couldn't quite articulate. Rumors began spreading across campus faster than wildfire, moving with nearly the speed of light. A popular history professor was overheard laughing and crying by the small bridge. Whispers claimed that Gail Kerman had left a cryptic two-word message written in her own blood on the asphalt of the Animal Sciences parking lot. Both murders were rumored to be political crimes, ritual killings carried out by an offshoot of the SDS in protest of the war. The idea was laughable. The New Sharon SDS only had 7 members. One offshoot would have drained their entire group. This absurd theory led to an even darker twist from the campus right-wingers, outside agitators, and so during those strangely warm days, we all kept watchful eyes for mysterious outsiders. The press, ever fickle, paid little attention to the eerie similarities between our killer and Jack the Ripper. Instead, they dug even further back into history, all the way to 1819. Anne Bray's body had been discovered on a patch of wet ground about 12 feet from the nearest sidewalk. Yet there were no footprints, not even her own. This detail caught the imagination of a resourceful New Hampshire journalist with a taste for the bizarre. He dubbed the killer Springheel Jack. inspired by the infamous Dudder, John Hawkins of Bristol, who had murdered 5 of his wives with peculiar pharmaceutical contraptions. The name stuck, probably because of the unmarked ground that added an air of the supernatural to the case. On the 21st, it rained again, turning the campus into a muddy swamp. The mall and Krengle became quagmires, and the police announced that they deployed plainclothes detectives, both men and women, around campus. To compensate, they pulled half the patrol cars off duty. The campus newspaper published an indignant, if slightly incoherent, editorial protesting the move. Their argument, as far as anyone could tell, was that with undercover officers blending in as students, it would be impossible to tell a genuine, outside agitator from a disguised cop. As twilight fell, the fog returned, creeping slowly up the tree-lined avenues. It moved deliberately, almost thoughtfully, swallowing buildings one by one. Though soft and insubstantial, it felt unyielding, implacable, and deeply unsettling. Everyone agreed that Springheel Jack was a man. No one doubted that. But the fog was his accomplice, a strange and shadowy partner. To me, it seemed feminine, as though our little school was caught in the grips of some mad romance, squeezed between 2 chaotic lovers, the man who stalked the night and the fog that hid his movements. Together, they made an inescapable pair, and the rest of us were simply trapped in their haunting embrace. A marriage sealed in blood, its grim embrace lingering in the air. I sat by the window, smoking as I watched the campus lights flicker on, one by one, in the deepening twilight. I wondered if it was all over. My roommate entered quietly and shut the door behind him. "It's going to soon," he said. I turned to look at him. "Did the radio say that?" "No," he replied. "Who needs a weatherman?" He stood beside me, gazing out into the encroaching dark. "Have you ever heard of a strawberry spring?" "Maybe," I said, thinking back. "Something grandmothers talk about, isn't it?" "Strawberry spring is like Indian summer," he explained, "only much rarer. Around here, you get a good Indian summer every 2 or 3 years. But weather like this, it's supposed to happen only once every 8 or 10 years. It's a full spring, a lying spring, like Indian summer is a full summer. My grandmother used to say that a strawberry spring means the worst norther of the winter is still to come. And the longer it lasts, the worse the storm will be. Folktales," I said dismissively. "You can't believe a word of them." Still, I glanced at him, feeling uneasy. "I'm nervous," I admitted. "What about you?" He smiled faintly and stole a cigarette from the open pack on the windowsill. "I suspect everyone but me and thee," he said with a chuckle. Then his smile faded slightly and he added, "And sometimes I wonder about thee. Want to head over to the Union and shoot some 8-ball? I'll spot you 10. "Can't," I said. "Trig prelim next week. I'm settling in with a magic marker and a pile of notes." After he left, I sat there for a long time, staring out the window. Even when I opened my book and tried to focus, part of me was still out there in the shadows, wandering through the creeping fog where something dark now held sway. That night, Adele Perkins was killed, despite 6 police cars and 17 plainclothes officers, 8 of them women, imported all the way from Boston. Springheel Jack struck again. The false spring, the lying spring, seemed to work in his favor, shielding him. He killed Adele and left her slumped behind the wheel of her 1964 Dodge. She was discovered the next morning, part of her body in the back seat, another part in the trunk. And written in blood on the windshield was something none of us could forget. This time, fact replaced rumor, 2 chilling words written in blood her. After that, the campus went slightly mad. Adele Perkins was one of those people everyone vaguely recognized but no one really knew. She was one of the nameless, overworked women who manned the late-night shift at the Grinder, working tirelessly from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., serving hordes of hungry students on study breaks from the library across the street. In her final 3 nights, the curfew likely brought her some relief. After 9 p.m., her only customers were wary cops and cheerful janitors. Even the campus's empty buildings seemed to soften their usual air of hostility. There's little left to say. The police, as desperate as the rest of us, made an ill-fated arrest. They detained Hanson Gray, an unassuming sociology graduate student who happened to be homosexual and couldn't account for his whereabouts on some of the fatal nights. He was charged, arraigned, and then quickly released when the case against him fell apart. He fled back to his hometown in New Hampshire, leaving behind the chaos and fear. But the terror wasn't over. On the final, unspeakable night of that strawberry spring, Marcia Curran was murdered on the mall. Why she had ventured out alone is a question that will never be answered. Marcia was a sad, lonely girl, plump but pretty, who shared an apartment in town with 3 other girls. Somehow, she slipped onto campus as silently as Springheel Jack himself. What drew her out that night? Perhaps her need was as deep and unknowable as her killer's. An inexplicable longing for one final, passionate encounter with the warm fog, the scent of the sea, and the sharp, cold blade. That was on the night of the 23rd. On the 24th, the college president announced that spring break would begin a week early, and the campus emptied in a frantic exodus. We didn't leave cheerfully. We scattered like frightened sheep ahead of a storm. The police stayed behind, patrolling the now haunted campus, but even they couldn't banish the dark specter that lingered in the fog. I had a car on campus and crammed 6 other students inside, their luggage piled in chaotic heaps. The ride wasn't pleasant. For all we knew, Springheel Jack could have been in the car with us. That night, the temperature dropped 15 degrees and northern New England was hit by a fierce storm that began with sleet and ended with over a foot of snow. As usual, the storm claimed its casualties, elderly men collapsing from heart attacks while shoveling their driveways. And then, as if by magic, it was April. Clean showers fell, and the nights turned starry and serene. They called it Strawberry Spring, though no one knows why. It's an evil, deceitful time that only comes around every 8 to 10 years. Springheel Jack left with the fog, and by early June, the campus chatter had shifted to draft protests and sit-ins targeting a building where a well-known napalm manufacturer was conducting job interviews. By then, the subject of Springheel Jack was almost entirely avoided. A horror too fresh, too raw to revisit. I suspect many people turn the events over and over in their minds, searching for a crack in the seamless egg of madness, anything that would make sense of it all. That was the year I graduated, the next year I married. By 1971, I had a good job at a local publishing house, and we welcomed a child into our lives. A curious, bright boy with my eyes and his mother's smile. Now, he's almost school age, so full of wonder. Then, today's paper. Of course, I knew it was here. I felt it yesterday morning when I woke to the sound of snowmelt rushing down the gutters and smelled the salty tang of the ocean from our porch. 9 miles from the nearest beach, I knew Strawberry Spring had returned. Last night, on my drive home from work, I had to turn on my headlights to pierce through the mist already seeping out of the fields and hollows, softening the edges of the buildings and wrapping streetlights in delicate halos. This morning's paper confirmed it. A girl was killed on the New Sharon campus near the Civil War cannons. They found her body last night, partially buried in a melting snowbank. But she wasn't all there. My wife is upset. She keeps asking me where I was last night. I can't give her an answer. I don't remember. I recall leaving work. I remember switching on my headlights to cut through the enchanting, creeping fog. And then nothing. My memory goes blank. I've been thinking about that other foggy night so many years ago. The one when I had a headache and walked through the mist, past all those beautiful, formless shadows. I've been thinking about the trunk of my car, that ugly word trunk. I can't stop wondering why I feel so afraid to open it. My wife is crying in the next room as I write this. She thinks I was with another woman last night. And oh dear God, I think she might be right.